Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for y'all. So we're coming back with some more branded Despia games today. Yeah, I just came back to the deck. Obviously I'm still like laddering with it and a bunch of other decks that I've shown off here. Still the first week of Season 11 here. When it comes to like a deck that I want to consistently ladder with and I know will consistently do well, this is one of the decks that I like to come back to. This and of course Sword Soul Tenyi here. Yeah, branded Despia, this build has been working really well for me. I actually did make one slight change to it though. I took out one of the two Infinite Impermanences and put in an Effect Veiler instead. There's a couple of reasons for this, and I actually usually like to do this. I just hadn't really, I guess, thought much to do it with this build for some reason. A couple of reasons. One that I usually like to do, and one that a user in a comment actually pointed out, a viewer rather I should say. The reason that I like to have one Veiler and one Imperm a lot of the time, this was a bit more relevant when Crossout Desginator was at 3, but it's nice to have the variety for Crossout Desginator, especially in this format where Veiler is fairly common. It's definitely a lot more common in this format than I think just about any other Master Duel format we've seen in the past here. So I think having the option to negate, especially for this deck, is particularly important if they try to Veiler your Aluber or your Lubellion. Either way, you can go ahead and just cross it out if you have the cross out, and of course the Veiler in the deck as well. Someone else also pointed out in a comment that it's nice to have Effect Veiler in the deck as an option to draw with Guardian Chimera. If you draw Infinite Impermanence with Guardian Chimera during your opponent's turn, you're not going to be able to use the Imperm, but if you draw Veiler, you can use that. So that was a very good point that I thought they made, so I went ahead and that was actually the main thing that made me be like, oh yeah, I need to take Imperm out for a Veiler. So I should have set that person's name aside or written it down or something, but thank you very much for that suggestion there. I always love hearing your guys' suggestions in the comments below. They are definitely more than welcome and appreciated. They are very much, I think, what helps me improve most of this game, which, as I've said many times, is why I like getting that feedback from you all there. So, extra deck I've thought about messing with as well. I kind of want more Super Poly targets, like the Mud Dragon. I want the Mud Dragon back, but I do also like having the Proskenion as a Super Poly. Not just a Super Poly target, but just like an option in general against particularly Sword Soul Tenyi, right? Like if we get Protoss and they call Dark, that's really rough for us. But I think if you're running Proskenion, there's a lot of situations where there's a lot of times, or I should say, in that situation where you get Protoss and they call it Dark, where having Proskenion or not is going to make the difference of whether you, win or not. So, given that Protoss is, a fairly common, it's a fairly common situation to find yourself in. So, I like having the Proskenion. I feel like there have been more situations where it's come up than the Mud Dragon. I did have a situation relatively recently where the Mud Dragon, I'm trying to remember actually if I could have made it in that duel. In any case, regardless, I would like to have, ideally the Mud Dragon as well for an alternate Super Poly target, but the only other thing I could really see myself dropping for the extra is maybe a Titanklad, but, because I've seen some builds opt not to run this card, and it is relatively rare that you make it, but at the same time, I think we'll even see a game here where, I actually have the Titanklad. It was very relevant for an OTK. So, I don't know. It's like, this always happens to me with, these niche extra deck spots, right? Where it's like, you try not to be so biased, right? It's like, oh, I recently encountered a scenario where this niche card would have been good, so I should include it. I try not to be, too susceptible to that type of thinking. Trying to maintain an overall balance, I think, is more important than just, succumbing to your cognitive biases like that. But that said, again, with these niche extra deck spots, it can be so, up in the air, but the main deck is the same. I'm still rocking the 3 Edge Imp Chain. I did think about cutting one out just because there have been some times where, again, just trying to be, general versus, thinking about my recent experiences. And recent experiences have been time where I don't really need a 3rd Edge Imp Chain, but there have also been times in the past where I did really need the 3rd Edge Imp Chain, so really what it comes down to is that more testing just needs to be done. This is one of the main reasons I say, your sample size is always too small. Even if you play, 100 games with a specific build, that's a good enough, baseline, I think, to get a vague idea of what your deck's overall performance is, but I think even that isn't truly enough, to be totally honest with you. I think it requires hundreds and hundreds of games worth of data in order to really draw more objective conclusions. So, alright, that's about all I got to say about the build. Let's go ahead and break it down card by card, and then we'll look at some games. So we are playing 1 Effect Veiler, 2 Despain Tragedy, 3 Maxx, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 3 Edge Imp Chain, 1 Fairy Tale Snow, 2 Fallen of Albaz, 3 Aluber, the Jester of Despia, 1 Dramaturge of Despia, 1 Ad Libitum of Despia, 1 Nibiru, the Primal Being, 1 Harpies for the Jester, 2 Polymerization, 1 Foolish Burial, 2 Frightfur Patchwork, 3 Branded Fusion, 2 Super Polymerization, 2 Call by the Grave, 1 Crossout Desginator, 2 Branded Opening, 2 Branded and Red, and then finally 1 Infinite Impermanence. Extra deck is going to have 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, 1 Predaplant Dragostepelia, 1 Titanklad the Ash Dragon, 2 Albion, the Branded Dragon, 1 Despian Quaretits, 2 Masquerade, the Blazing Dragon, 2 Mirrorjade, the Iceblade Dragon, 2 Lubellion, the Searing Dragon, 2 Guardian Chimera, and then finally 1 Despian Proskenion. So that's going to round out the list there. Let's go ahead and take a look at some games. Alright, our first duel here is going to be against Machina / Earth Machines / Trains. This is that general hybrid of a deck. This duel in particular, if this is the one I'm remembering right, is going to feature some some good use of disruption and hand traps, which is one of the main reasons I wanted to show it here. So we're going to go second. Our opening hand is looking really solid, particularly if we're going second, right? When I'm looking at going second hands in particular, I'm not only looking for disruption, but for follow-up, of course, as well, right? So seeing that we have Valor, Ash, and then we open the Branded Fusion, as well as the Tragedy and the Edge Imp Chain for follow-up. So I've got a lot of options here as far as like how I can proceed with the next turn. Of course, that has a factor in the top card of my deck too, but yeah, I have some options for how I can disrupt the opponent and then how I can proceed with my next turn there. So really liking this hand here. Opponent's going to start with the Machina redeployment. Now, I've talked about this before when it comes to Ash Blossoming cards, right? Sometimes if you're playing against a deck that's not very familiar, it can be difficult to know what exactly you should be Ash Blossoming. Machina, I will say, is a deck that I'm not particularly familiar with, like, at all, like Earth Machines in general. I've played against them a few times, but I'm not, like, overall, like, very confident that I know, like, how they operate, right? That said, there are two main situations in which I'd like to Ash Blossom against decks that I'm not super familiar with. One that we're seeing right here is particularly if they use an effect that you can Ash that requires a discard, because that's an easy 2-for-1 right there. Like, yeah, they've pitched the Machina Fortress, so they're gonna like recur this as a resource anyway, but if I hit the Ash Blossom here, right, it's not just about like the lack of resources, is also about the knowledge as well. Like, I know now after they've only got 3 other cards that they opened with, in addition to the Fortress Engrave and the Machina redeployment here. Of course, another situation like in which I like to Ash Blossom, if I don't know exactly how the deck I'm playing against works, is if they're using any kind of like search, draw, or like filter type effect to basically find new cards. It's best if possible, in most situations, it's best if possible to like leave your opponent with just the cards they opened with, because that combination of cards is going to be much less likely to be effective than whatever they open with plus whatever they're searching, because whatever they're searching is obviously going to be, the missing piece of whatever's in their hand. So just general, like, if you don't know what exactly you're playing against, or whether you don't know how what you're playing against works, those are good like general tips of when to respond with an Ash Blossom. This opponent is going to end up using the Machina Fortress here, pitching a Super Express Bullet Train. They're then able to tribute the Machina Fortress for the Infinite Trek Brutal Bulldozer. So I'm reading this effect, and again, I see if this card is special summoned from the hand, they special summon it by tributing the Fortress, and then they can special an Infinite Track monster from their deck, but then they can only summon Earth Machines for the rest of the duel. So again, as my opponent is doing this, I am stopping and reading all these cards that I'm not familiar with, just to make sure I'm not, like, missing a combo piece here, right? Because I'm thinking of Valoring this Bulldozer, because once again, that's going to leave with my opponent with just 1 card in hand, as well as these resources engraved. Now, again, I know the Machina Fortress could potentially be revived, and looking at the Super Express Bullet Train, it is going to come back, or rather, a machine monster is going to come back from the graveyard to the hand during the end phase there. So I know after reading these that, okay, my opponent's got 1 other card besides this Bulldozer. They could still have plays. That is a possibility. I know there's a level 2 Infinite Track that like combines levels, and I don't think, my opponent hasn't used their normal summon yet. So this is in some ways a risky Veiler, and in other ways not. This Veiler that I'm about to activate here, because this last card could be live and could be enough for them to combo off, but I'm willing to hedge and bet that it's not, just like due to statistic probability, and I'm just going to go ahead and Veiler this monster here, and then sure enough they just set a card and pass, so that it did end up in fact being the right call. Opponent's going to add the Machina Fortress back to hand, so now we're going into our turn here. Get the Patchwork, which is like an alright draw. It's not bad, not particularly great, but it's not bad. And again, it's all about knowing. It's about knowing what you don't know, right? So we know, obviously, that our opponent's got this Bulldozer up. We know this is a Machina Fortress. We only don't know this one face-down card. So this is the only variable that we really have to contend with here. Nothing in the graveyard is really going to be much of a threat at this point anyway. So, yeah, so I'm looking at my hand, knowing that I only have one unknown variable to contend with. I'm feeling really confident about this. Going to lead with the Patchwork here just to add the Poly and another Edge Imp Chain before going into the Branded Fusion. There was actually kind of a reflex to test for Ash Blossom, if you want me to be totally honest there. But then, of course, you know, after activating the Patchwork, I realized, oh wait, of course I know my opponent's card is Machina Fortress, but it's still fine to activate it in that order. It's not really a big deal at all. So, I'm trying to think if there's anything I could have sent other than the Tragedy here off the Branded Fusion. Dramaturge has to be sent from the hand or field in order to be summoned, and Ad Libitum I wanted to add to hand rather than send there, so yeah, I really don't think there was too much else, but alright, now here I'm actually going to use the Mirrorjade's effect on this Bulldozer. It might seem a bit weird to banish like a weak seeming non-threat like that, but I know that Earth Machines are like relatively graveyard based. I'm pretty sure there is an Infinite Track monster that can bring one back from graveyard, and furthermore I also am aware that you know, of course, the Machina Fortress in hand, or not the Machina Fortress in hand. There's some other, like, is it the other Machina that can, like, bring itself back by banishing machines from graveyard? I know there's another way they can use resources in the graveyard, so I'm totally fine banishing this here. I'm going to move into the Guardian Chimera to take care of this face-down card, using Poly to do so. That way, the Guardian Chimera will be protected from effects that target it, so it's just hedging against not only this back row, but also some protection against it in case it ends up being something that will try to target my Guardian Chimera here. I can of course use the Ad Libitum in order to bring back the Mirrorjade anyway. That'll refresh its use, so this is all totally fine. Opponent reveals the face-down card to be the Urgent Schedule here. They're going to get a couple of summons. Fortunately, those effects are going to be negated. And then I can just use the Guardian Chimera to destroy one of these cards here. I actually really technically, or no, actually, that's right. I was going to say I technically probably should have banished this one because I know this is the one that combines levels, but I remembered I actually did banish this one for a particular reason because this does have a graveyard-based effect. I know I'm not going to be able to beat my opponent like quite on this turn, so I wanted to banish one that had a graveyard-based effect. And then, you know, the other one is fine to send to the graveyard. Again, just leaving with my opponent as few resources as possible. Even if I think I've got this game on lock, which I pretty much do at this point, you know, it's still important to, you know, obviously make sure that we're playing optimally still, because the opponent is going to have one more turn left. I don't think there's one card they can top deck in addition to the Fortress that can get them out of this, but there's no reason to set them up in such a way where it might happen, you know? So yeah, they go to summon the Fortress, and I just immediately concede, as the Fortress is definitely not going to be enough to get over my board here. So GG's opponent, let's go ahead and take a look at the next game. Alright, so this duel was against a stun deck. Not Eldritch, but like a more quote-unquote traditional, I guess, stun deck. Like, you know, think your Inspector of Borders plus all the Floodgates. I think there was some True King shenanigans going on here. Yeah, they don't have an extra deck, so yeah, there were some True King shenanigans going on here. We're going to take the first turn, and opening Aluber plus Brain Diffusion plus Brain Dead Red is fairly good. It's actually a bit overkill, honestly, as I'm going to end up adding this Brain Dead opening, but that's fine. I'll end up Brain Dead opening here, just end up discarding it with the Lubellion, just to give my fusion monsters a bit of extra protection here. The Brain Dead Red is kind of nice disruption insurance as well. So yeah, we're going to do some fairly standard combo stuff here, you know, getting the Ad Libitum off of the Tragedy, then going into the Mirrorjade. If you want to know how these, like, you know, standard turn 1 combos work with this deck here, definitely feel free to check out the combo guide that I have linked in the description below down there for some more information on how these standard, again, these basic plays go. So, okay, as soon as I see my opponent go to battle phase, doesn't do anything, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get evenly matched here. So I knew this was coming. in response to the evenly match, I'm going to activate a couple of things here in order to make this evenly a little bit less painful for me. One, I'm going to chain this branded in red. That way I'm able to fuse my stuff on board. More importantly, I'm going to fuse my Mirrorjade and Ad Libitum. This will allow me to end with, after the evenly, not only the fusion monster I'm going to summon off the branded in red, but also a fresh Mirrorjade that can banish monsters. So, in addition, I'm also going to chain Mirrorjade's effect. Because I'm about to fuse with Mirrorjade anyway, and this Aluber is going to get banished anyway, I might as well get the free search in with the Albion here. Alright, so Mirrorjade's going to banish the Aluber, which again I would have banished off the evenly anyway, so the branded in red will then fuse into... I ended up going for Guardian Chimera because I thought I was going to have an opportunity to, you know, use the like to pop the evenly matched and then get the draws, but unfortunately not. Yeah, because my opponent doesn't have cards to destroy, I'm not able to get the draws off the Guardian Chimera. So technically I should have fused into something else. But I don't know that it super duper would have mattered. Well, it's not going to end up mattering, and we'll see why here in a moment. It's actually because my opponent has a second evenly matched for the battle phase as well. So I'm going to end up having to banish that other fusion monster I made, the Guardian Chimera. So I see the duality and think it's probably going to be flows, but then of course they reveal the Inspector border, and I realize now it's once again a more just like traditional kind of stun deck there. So my opponent's going to summon the Inspector border, and then I'm going to chain the Mirrorjade effects to the summon. And this is actually pretty important here because I want to make sure this Inspector border gets off the board as quickly as possible here. So this time I'll set a Titanklad. It actually does matter that I set this one specifically because I do want to special summon a Fallen of Albaz from my deck during the end phase. I want to do this now during the end phase, not because I actually intend to use the Fallen of Albaz to like fuse with stuff, but if I can get out as many summons as I can before my opponent's back rows are live, if one of them's like a summon limit or something, I want to be able to summon monsters right now before my opponent has a chance to flip them up. And then I can go into, you know, more damage during my opponent's next turn. Like I do have this Aluber in my hand, obviously I have quite a few plays I could potentially do with that. I just don't know if like the summon is going to resolve, if my opponent again is going to flip like a summon limit maybe, so just getting as much damage on board now is the most important thing to me here. So I will use both the Titanklad and the Albion effect here. Titanklad is some of the Albaz, Albion I'll just add a branded fusion, and the opponent's going to concede. It doesn't seem like their face downs were too relevant there. So yeah, again, just being mindful of like, you know, what you're playing against and how you can respond to it is fairly important, especially against stun decks like this. So there's another game in there. Let's go ahead and move on to the next. This one's going to be against Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc, which I have been seeing like somewhat semi more often lately. I've seen comments saying they've seen it more often lately too. It's a deck I could see myself coming back to at some point soon here. Let me know in the comments below if you're particularly eager to see more Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc. It's been actually quite a while since I've covered it, but opponent's going to go first here. I do have an Ash Blossom for disruption, and as soon as my opponent bird calls, I'm going to snap off this Ash Blossom because I have played this deck enough to know that like if you're starting with bird call, they really needed that search. Because obviously, and I don't know how obvious this is, especially because it's been a while since Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc has been like super duper relevant, but you ideally want to bird call later in your combo. So if the opponent is starting off with a bird call, that's a good sign that whatever they're searching for, they're going to really need for their combo there in order to keep like extending. And that does seem to be the case here, as my opponent does end up going for their Recital Starling, but does so with 2 Turquoise Warblers. So that's definitely not an ideal setup. That tells me that my opponent does not have like any other birds in their hand that they can like make Exceeds with, or they can just, you know, summon with in general. So that means that they're going to have to go into Barrel Canary probably next. Now they can still make the Utopic Draco Future here, but I've got the Super Poly and the Despian monster, so I'm really not concerned about that like at all. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and let this play out here. Well, I mean, I don't have Disruption to stop it anyway, but I think honestly, no, I mean, if I didn't affect Valor, I'd probably still Valor that. I don't know if I would still Valor that, actually. If I know my opponent's going for Utopic Draco Future, I know I can Super Poly with that. Like, is there a reason to Valor or Imperm these searches here? This search I might Valor Imperm. This search I would almost definitely Valor Imperm. And it's funny, because that would look like a misplay. But again, knowing that I have the Super Poly and I can answer this board, I think it's more important to, like, take that resource away from my opponent for the rest of the duel. And then leave them without a follow-up, instead of just, like, you know, leaving them with only the Recital Starling, and then they could potentially go into this Draco Future later in the duel when I don't have an answer for it. So, But again, that's all just hypothetical if I would have had that in hand. This Feather Duster is not a bad top deck at all. Can take out this back row, which I think is a Solemn Judgment. Yeah, it's a Solemn Judgment, so I'm really glad I took that out. Definitely not a card you typically see in Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc, but one I'm glad to see going to the graveyard off of a Feather Duster there. So I'm going to summon the Tragedy and then use the Super Poly to just go for probably a Masquerade here. Yeah, Masquerade. That'll get this Draco Future off the board, no problems. We can then use the Tragedy in order to add an Aluber for even more plays. So it's not even, yeah, it wasn't even a good play just to get my opponent's monster off the board. It was just a good play in general to get my own play started up. Oh no, that's right. I get a Dramaturge here in order to branded in red. I always do this. I always forget that the monster cannot attack directly off branded in red. It's a really bad habit of mine. I'll summon a second Masquerade here, and then get the Dramaturge back and be like, oh cool, I've got lethal, this is exactly 8,000. But then it's like, I move to battle phase, it's like, oops, nope, the other Masquerade can't attack. So, actually, I already used my normal summon, so I wouldn't have been able to summon Aluber anyway, because I just summoned the Despian Tragedy, but you know, having the opponent be at 2,500 with 2 Masquerades on board is fine anyway. So I thought until I got Lightning Storm, and then I was like, ah, crap. And I know they have the Barrel Canary to follow up with. Yeah, Lightning Storm and Solemn Judgment, not cards you would typically see. I don't think in Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc, but you know, this is why I so often some of the stuff in defense mode on turn 1 is like, yeah, it's not common to see decks like this play Lightning Storm, but like Lightning Storm is still a generic enough card that I think a lot of people will tend to use it as like quote-unquote filler if they're missing other ultra rare like staple stuff, which isn't even a bad thing, right? Like, you know, Lightning Storm, if you're missing generic staples, Lightning Storm can be a good like filler one until you get more if you've got a copy of that. But so yeah, in any case, that's why on turn 1 it might look weird that I play like my Mirrorjades and stuff in defense mode all the time, but that's because of Lightning Storm. I'm playing around Lightning Storm when I do that. So okay, so here, yeah, I want to talk about this sequence of plays a little bit here. I brought back the Masquerade during my opponent's in phase, hoping they might get scared and Zeus it. Basically, a lot of the plays I'm about to make are going to look weird, but they're all in the hopes that I'm baiting out my opponent's Zeus destruction. Because obviously I need to take care of this before I can like get a foothold on the board, right? So I'm actually thinking to myself here, I've got another Masquerade in graveyard that I can potentially bring back, and I've got this Edge Imp Chain, but I can only really do like one, you know, fusion summon here. So I've actually been doing this quite a bit lately, where I'll summon Edge Imp Chain and battle with it. Not even necessarily for the first effect, but sometimes just for the second. Here, I definitely want the first effect, though. And because my opponent Zeus in defense mode, I know I'm going to be able to keep my Edge Imp Chain. It won't be destroyed by this battle. So I just wanted another material to fuse with. That's why I summoned the Edge Imp Chain and battled for another one there. Plus, I thought if my opponent saw me doing that, they might get scared and pull the trigger on the Zeus anyway. Again, everything I'm doing here is going to look weird, but it's all in order to bait out this Zeus destruction here. So now I'm going to go ahead and fuse these two in order to make the Dragostepelia. This was a bit, I don't know, I feel like I could have made something a bit better here, but I wanted to threaten my opponent's like potential other plays before they moved into battle phase. Basically, I wanted to force them to battle before making other plays. Like, if my opponent tried to make other plays here, like I could have used the Dragostepelia to negate it. I'll throw a counter on the Zeus, because why not? I don't know, the more I thought about it after the duel, the more I was like, yeah, that Dragostepelia was really, like, unnecessary. I maybe shouldn't have done that here, but I've got a Foolish Burial to send my other Tragedy. This will let me add an Aluber and give me a lot more options as far as, like, you know, stuff to do here to play around this Zeus. I'm going to add the Branded Fusion, and then I can bring back the Masquerade, and then I'm going to go for Despian Quaretits here with the Polymerization. The idea is I'm going to drop Zeus's attack to 0, and then I'm going to go ahead and try to battle. And then if they try to, you know, if they use Zeus's effect on my Quaretits, then I can just make an Albaz and fuse into a Mirrorjade. So basically, as soon as this Quaretits hit the board, my opponent's Zeus was kind of doomed, so to speak. Like, obviously, yeah, it's got its attack dropped, and yeah, they did actually end up board wiping in response, but like I said, that just lets me go into Albaz and then fuse with the Zeus into the Mirrorjade. Despian Quaretits is a really good card to have in the extra deck. It might seem like a less than important slot, and yeah, you can get away without playing it, but there are a lot of scenarios like this one where Despian Quaretits, through both its attack drop effect and the ability to pull Albaz out of the deck when it's destroyed, can offer a fair amount of like inevitability to, you know, as far as like solving the board state, quote unquote, as far as like dismantling your opponent's board and getting an advantageous foothold there. Alright, that's going to do it for that one. Let's move on to the next game. Alrighty, you got one here against Sword Soul Tenyi. So, always nice to see games against like the other Tier 1 deck. Alright, looks like we're taking the first turn here. We did open the Foolish Burial for the Despain Tragedy for the Aluber, so... of course I'm going to start with the Patchwork first here. This is why I like to run the Foolish Burial. This hand doesn't happen too often, but... Well, even that last game, you know, right at the end we top decked the Foolish Burial for the Tragedy for the Aluber to help set up lethal there, so... I like having the Foolish here. It's pretty much like a Rhoda for Aluber. Excuse me. Yeah, the Foolish Burial is pretty much a Rhoda for Aluber. You do have to be mindful that you can't use the Despian Tragedy there, but what you can do, what I'm doing here, is since we don't get the Tragedy Surge later for the Ad Libitum this turn, I'm just going to send the Ad Libitum with the Brain Diffusion in order to make the Lubellion. That way I can then get the Ad Libitum back with a branded in red and then use it that way. So even if you have to use Despian Tragedy early like that in the combo, there are still ways to set up your searches there. Discarding the Edge Imp Chain, even though I can't use the Patchwork this turn, it's still nice just to be able to have the advantage, of course, and the option to use it next turn. Okay, so here my plan for Guardian Chimera. What I do decide to make that is to use the Mirrorjade, the Ad Libitum I get back with the Branded in red, and then a Nibiru. So... my opponent special Vishida and then immediately went into Monk. I, of course, you know, I know what they're up to. They want to bounce the Mirrorjade with the Vishida to not only get it off the board, but then not trigger the end phase effect there. They can only do that if they control a non-effect monster, though. So, basically, I'm just going to have to answer this Monk. And we obviously have quite a few different ways to... well, we actually have one way to do that here, and that's going to be the Branded in red. But the Branded in red will, of course, not only get the Guardian Chimera to answer the Monk of the Tenyi, but will also refresh the Mirrorjade for other responses later in the turn as well. I do also have the call by, like I could just call by the Vishida, but this is a more efficient answer. I want to save the call by for like a potential, you know, disruption card that might get played against me, or another graveyard-based effect that my opponent might need to activate there, so... besides, I want to get my draws for my, you know, to potentially get Maxx and or Ash as early as possible there. So, we don't get either. We just get Brain the opening Crossout Desginator, but we have the Mirrorjade refreshed, so that's still important as well. Opponent's going to special on Adhara, go for another Monk here. Now, at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and flip up the Called By and banish that Vishida out of the graveyard. My opponent did send an Adhara, so they could add, and I think they do actually add the Vishida back, but... the effects are negated for the rest of the turn, so they can't really banish it from hand to get that effect either. It's not really going to do much of anything there. Opponent's going to set 2 and pass. Now, at this point, also, I wanted to save the Mirrorjade, and I used the call by there instead of the Mirrorjade to answer the Monk, specifically because if my opponent doesn't have any more plays, well, one, I know I can call by and negate the Vishida for the rest of the turn. I won't have to worry about it anymore. 2, I know if my opponent doesn't have any more plays at this point, they're going to have to rely on, like, setting this maybe like a blackout or something. Well, and also, of course, I was waiting to see if they would, because I don't think they've used their normal summon this turn, right? Yeah, they haven't used their normal summon. I was waiting for them to, like, normal summon a Moye, honestly, or, like, a Taya. And then if they normal summon Moye, I could just banish the Moye itself and leave them with the Sword Soul token. If it was Taya, I could just, you know, banish Taya on response to summon, and then it won't even get a chance to summon the token. Same if, like, Longyan comes down. So that's why I wanted to save the Mirrorjade banish there. But since the opponent set 2 and went to end phase, I realized, oh, they did that with a fair amount of confidence. So I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, they probably have a blackout face down, so I really need to banish this Monk. I probably would have done this regardless during the end phase, whether I thought they had a blackout or not, but I'm reading blackout pretty hard here, so I'm just going to go ahead and banish this Monk. Then I get the Albion effect, and the opponent just concedes right then and there. So I'm guessing their face downs are like maybe a Monk and a call by or something, or maybe like a Monk and an Imperm, but either way, it's not going to be enough to get out of that situation there. So we have one more duel left. Let's go ahead and go straight into it. Alright, last game here is going to be against Floowandereeze, which we always love to see. I always mention this when Floowandereeze comes up, that we love to see games winning against Floowandereeze, which we do. I do anyway, so... Okay, going second here, we open both Imperm and Ash, so obviously, you know, knowing what we're playing against, it's going to be fairly good. Opponent does have the Magnificent map here, we go ahead and start off with that, but then they actually follow up with the Floowandereeze and the Advent of Adventure, which is pretty surprising. Usually this card is used in response to like a disruption card, in order to, it's kind of like a call by. It's not exactly like a call by, but it's kind of like a call by in a Rhoda in 1, where you can banish whatever's being targeted by Valor or Imperm, and then you can just go ahead and get a search, and that effect will resolve anyway. But if my opponent is using it here preemptively to banish a, they end up banishing a Wind Barrier statue from their hand, they're obviously trying to use this to set up their plays. So, like I talked about earlier in the video, a search effect that uses a resource from hand is a prime target for Ash Blossom. I'm just going to go ahead and, toss it out right here. Even though I could potentially use this against like an Evelyn or Rabino later in the turn, just obviously the way my opponent's playing this, I know they really needed that search. And sure enough, they just end up passing without any of their plays. So, alright, now here I'm going to end up using the branded opening. I'll pitch Nibiru because it's going to be useless in this matchup. That'll let me get Aluber for branded fusion. Rather than my standard plays, I'm just going to go for an OTK here. So what I'm doing here is I sent the Albaz and the Fairy Tale Snow. And the reason I sent Fairy Tale Snow was so that I could, one, use her as a light monster to fuse into Albion. But two, I also wanted the Snow set up in the graveyard to potentially, if I need a little bit extra damage during the battle phase, I can potentially, like, banish everything in my grave, maybe even hand and board if I need to. If it can get me that extra push for lethal this turn, I wanted to have that option. So that's why I set up the Fairy Tale Snow here. Again, of course, also just needing a light monster for the Albion here. Albion being able to summon even more damage out. I'll banish the Albaz and the Nibiru to go for, I'm assuming, what is this, a Masquerade here? Or no, the Titanklad, that's right. This is where the Titanklad actually came up, the Nibiru being a good target for it. Not only, of course, for the requirement of having a monster with 2,500 more attack points, but also giving it a huge attack boost at 4,000 points. Then I can just normal summon the Albaz and swing with all my monsters for lethal. But again, even if I hadn't had the Albaz to normal summon, I could have just used Fairy Tale Snow to banish a bunch of stuff, bring her back, and then swing for lethal. So that's how off of like one branded opening you can just kind of like set up an OTK there, potentially. Obviously the Titanklad was a bit of a variable, kind of depended on what I had in hand. Although I'm trying to think here, like 25 plus 25 is obviously 5,000 plus the Fairy Tale Snow would be 6,850, so 1,200, gains 100 attack. So, I mean, yeah, as long as you set a level 8 or higher monster for the Titanklad there, that's all you really need for lethal, because if I'm doing my math right, a level 8 monster with that setup should get you lethal there. Again, not factoring in the Albaz, but factoring in the Fairy Tale Snow, but that's the same, pretty much the same amount of damage anyway. In any case, just want to show that, one, very satisfying win against Floowandereeze, and two, how to set up an OTK like that there. So, alright, that does it for the duels. Let's move now to the outro. Alright everybody, thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end like this. I do very much appreciate that, not just personally, but as a means of supporting the channel there. I also appreciate those of you who are commenting and or subscribing. Comments, I'm always looking for feedback, suggestions as far as like the build and gameplay goes, even if it's a small one. Like I said at the beginning of the video, that one person who suggested Valor over Imperm, caused me to be like, oh yeah, I should be playing a Valor instead of, one Valor, one Imperm instead of two Imperm. That is a really good point, actually. So, even like little minor edits like that you would make to the deck, definitely let me know. I'm feeling pretty confident about this build. I feel very solid in it. I really like the build that we've landed on here as far as like for branded Despia goes. Again, the extra deck, ideally, like if I could have one more spot to put in Money Mud Dragon, I'd like to put in that, but it's not like super essential. And then there's still some tax stuff I'm kind of debating in the main deck, but I think overall this is a very, very solid list to ladder with here in a best of one format. So yeah, that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. So this is XLex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.